I think today being the 11th of Muharram, the 10 days of Muharram, and the fact that it is the beginning of our Hijri year and calendar, it is they're asking for CA 242865. I think it's probably in the way something is not right. CA 242865. Unlike other civilizations or societies or religions, the Islamic New Year more linked to the word Hijri because of the migration, the Hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Mecca to Medina. And if we look at the pattern of major happenings in our history and in Islam, then nothing happens without a reason, a purpose, and an objective. And there is always something in it, either in the form of a lesson, but more importantly, something that we have to learn and implement. There has to be some form of action. And sometimes we do not take the opportunity to find out what is Hijri calendar all about. We don't look at the significance of it being linked to the migration. We also link it sometimes, rightly or wrongly, that's a different debate, to happenings of the first 10 days of Muharram, which are very significant, all 10 days. The 10th of Muharram has its own significance. It is a sunnah to fast, because when Rasulullah sallam migrated and went from Mecca to Medina, and he arrived in Medina, he found out that the Jews were fasting. And he said that we have a greater right over Musa alayhi salam, and therefore we as Muslims will also fast, but we'll add one more day to make it different from the Jews. But at the same time, we must keep in mind that the significance of the 10th of Muharram existed prior to Islam as well. The people of Quraysh used to, in their own way, in whichever way the pagans, used to have some form of observance of the 10th of Muharram. So it's not something that started with Islam. There was even our 12 months. If we're talking of an Islamic calendar, the 12 months were there already. The names of those months were virtually there already. So we need to fully understand that. We also need to understand that the significance of those 10 days was established long before, as I said just now, even prior to Islam, during Islam, and long before the very sad occurrence, heart-rending occurrence of the martyrdom of the grandchild of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is something that we cannot ignore. We have to feel it in our bones. It should warm our bloods and bring tears to our eyes. It's that kind of happening. But that is not Muharram. It is the stature of the martyr of Hussein radiallahu anh, that happened on the 10th of Muharram. Muharram is not celebrated or recognized because of that. The importance of Muharram was already there. It existed. So we just get the facts right. That doesn't mean that what happened with Hussein radiallahu anh is something small. It's one of the great happenings or sad happenings but in the history of Islam, and there's a lot of significance attached to it. So we must look at the Hijri calendar is one thing that starts with the first month of the calendar, which is Muharram. We must also look at the migration in itself. Why did it need to take place? Who was migrating? You, me, somebody? No. The greatest creation of Almighty Allah is required to leave his homeland and go to another home. So there must be something very important about it. Otherwise, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being the greatest creation, Almighty can make everything happen for him. It's kun fayakun, and you don't have to migrate. But we have to find those reasons with regard to it. We must also bring to our minds the fact that migration was not exclusive to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have it, 2 migrations in the life of Musa alayhi salam. First, he had to escape from being arrested because of an incident which is in the Quran, when another person of his tribe was fighting, and Musa alayhi salam went to help him, and one of the persons in the fight died, and Musa alayhi salam was told that he'll be arrested. So he migrated and went to Madian, where he stayed for 10 years, where he got married, and then came back as a Nabi to sort out the Pharaoh. So that was his first migration. His second migration was when he took the Israelites out of Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, we know that story, and the miraculous parting of the sea, and eventually going to Palestine, or what is known today as Palestine, around there. So migration is not just exclusive to Rasulullah. So we need to know that significance, why so many Anbiyas had to migrate. And Ibrahim alayhi salam is continuous migration. He was moving between Egypt and Palestine and Iraq and Syria, and eventually coming to what is Makkah. In fact, Makkah is a creation. It's not like Rasulullah sallallahu going from Makkah to Medina. Ibrahim alayhi salam in his migration went to the desert. Of course, being guided by Almighty Allah. He won't just go in the desert where there was no Zamzam at that time. So these are very significant happenings, and they are very significant reasons for it. But at the same time, we must realize that the migration, the month of Muharram, all these things have a very, and therefore the martyrdom had to take place in Muharram in many ways, if we look at what Muharram is all about. It is the beginning of the success or the final establishment of the success of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mission, which seems in human understanding at that time to the Quraysh and all that, we have won. They are running away. Human interpretation. But it was, nobody was running away. It was entering the next phase in the growth of Islam, of Muslims under the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. It was progress. It was success. But in human calculation at that time, we know now, so we can say it's a success. But at that time, the Quraysh were probably, they were not happy about it in the context of that was the moment that they had planned to assassinate Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's when Hijrah took place. And we know the incident around that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked Ali radiallahu anhu to lie on his bed, covering himself so that people outside peeping or trying to find out if Rasulullah is inside would realize, no, he's still sleeping. Not knowing that Rasulullah with Abu Bakr had left already. And the Quraysh who were there outside to assassinate him were assuming Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is still there. So it is at that point that Hijrah starts. when the Quraysh is about to assassinate, Almighty Allah had within His power, He didn't allow them to see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam leaving. They were there. He walked past them. Their eyes were open, but their ability to see Rasulullah was taken away for that moment from them. But similarly, Almighty Allah had the power not to allow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to leave. So there was a very important message in the Hijrah. In our new year, our new year is definitely not a thing to in any way to compare with any new year of any other community or religion and so on. So there were lots of significance. We'll very briefly look at some of those things that were linked to Hijrah, and of course subsequently linked to the martyrdom as well, because the outcome and the message is more or less the same. So what did Hijrah or migration to Medina, what did it establish? And this happened after one of the companions, Musayyib ibn Umar, was asked by Rasulullah sallallahu when the Medinites had expressed that they want to learn about Islam. He was sent by Rasulullah sallallahu to preach and propagate and make dawah to the Medinites. So Hijrah took place at a point when the tribes in Medina had decided that they accept Rasulullah sallallahu as a Nabi, as a prophet. But they went further than accepting him as a Nabi. They also had decided that they will make him their ruler. Now for a nation, for a tribe to decide to make somebody they have never met, only heard of him through a companion, to decide before meeting him, not only their guide as a Nabi, but also their leader in terms of governance, giving him the power to rule over them. The Muslims in Medina had decided that. And having decided that, they had come to Makkah to invite and make bay'ah, would give their hands in the hands of Rasulullah to give their allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ and to invite him to come and settle in Medina. So Rasulullah ﷺ, we know the incidents, we won't go into it, goes there. And then look at the manner in which the house of Rasulullah, where he was going to stay in Medina, was chosen, as well as Masjid Nabawi, because the house and Masjid Nabawi is on one side. So Rasulullah said, leave it to my camel. People were inviting him, this is my land, that is my land. Rasulullah, you can have it, you can. Why not? If they had accepted him as Nabi, surely anybody who owned land in Medina would want Rasulullah to take that piece of land for his home and for the masjid. What happened then was that Rasulullah ﷺ, knowing through revelation that Almighty has already instructed the camel to stop where Rasulullah ﷺ's house was to be and where Masjid Nabi was supposed. So it was not a human choice. Almighty Allah made it happen, and the camel went and sat at that spot, and that's where it took place. But the point is that now, imagine, compare the migration with the refugee status today. Here it is a migration where it is by invitation, and it is also by invitation to become the ruler. A huge difference from normal migrations. But what happened there was, and there are about 5 or 6 points, but the most significant one is that it was the first step in the history of mankind after many, many centuries after Nabi Musa alayhi salam's incidents and Isa alayhi salam's. It was the first time that a global liberation of humanity was going to take place. It was not just people becoming Muslims. Because remember that with Miraj taking place, a global society was established, with Rasulullah ﷺ as a founder and the head of a global community. The world was not going to be anymore a small world of east, west, south, north, Middle East, and you name the countries. No, we are going to enter a phase 1500 years ago where a global community was going to emerge. And that has happened in many ways. And when we don't think as global communities anymore, we actually end up harming ourselves. Race, color, and all these things, there's no more time for this. It never was, but from the Hijrah onwards, this became a universal thing, not just a Muslim thing. So liberation of humanity. And the manner in which human beings should deal with each other was established for the first time in human history. It was never done before by any other Nabi, any other society or anybody. And therefore we cannot belittle the ukhuwah that took place in Medina, the brotherhood that was established, a kind of brotherhood that was never done ever before and never after, and probably will never be done again. And that is the declaration of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that the Muhajir and the Ansar have become blood brothers, or even more than blood brothers and sisters. Because what that implied was that now that the Muhajirun have come from Mecca, you Ansar, the people of Medina, you're not only accepting me as a prophet and asking me to be your ruler, but you're also accepting all the teachings that are revealed in the Quran and will be revealed. There were still verses to be revealed then, and whatever I'm going to teach you. And one of the things I'm teaching you is a proper interpretation of what brotherhood is. And it's not easy. Now that we talk of it 1500 years afterwards or subsequently, we think, oh, it's another incident. But imagine yourself 1500 years ago as a tribe in Medina, not a very, in terms of material aspects, just another small group of, or a small nation in Medina. There were Jews there, there were some Christians there, and of course the Arab tribes were there. Now what happened in the brotherhood is something that we can go on learning and benefiting from at all times. And Rasulullah said, you are now brothers and sisters, and in order to implement this brotherhood, the Ansar who now have and the Muhajirin who are have-nots will have to merge in such a way that they all become haves and have-nots together. So if I had any wealth and lived in Medina, I had to share it willingly, happily, wanting to do it, excited about it, and I would share it. If I had more, I'll share it with more than one Muhajir. If I didn't have too much, I'll share it with one Muhajir. If I had 2 slices of bread, then I'll share my 1 slice with the Muhajir. That was the spirit. So they shared their wealth totally. They shared whatever businesses they had at that time in whatever form, they divided it. And in 1 or 2 cases where the Muhajir, they were unmarried men or men who had come without their wives and they needed to be married or something, then Rasulullah advised those companions that were from Medina that if your 2nd, 3rd wife is willing to marry one of the Muhajirs, then you can divorce her. So even to that extent, the brotherhood went. Very pure, very clean, very elegant, and that took place in reality. Every Muhajir was linked to a brother and a lady with a sister in Medina. An absolutely mind-boggling brotherhood and sisterhood that had emerged. The migration also established, without any doubt, that people of faith will always triumph. And that's an historical truth. We will believe it as Muslims, there's no question. So when we see these little episodes happening around us, especially Now things like this have always happened historically. Whatever is happening in the Middle East, whether it's Yemen, whether it's Syria, whether it's in Bangladesh with the Rohingyas and all that, these are realities that have kind of things that have always happened, but we are experiencing as living human beings. It's happening, it's hard so, it's rending. But if you understand certain aspects of Hijrah, then you might realize, or you might be able to see, that it's actually the turnaround that has started. An improvement and a success is being established. And if there's hardships, and we can't understand them, how they keep quiet, but if you put your mind to it and you lift your hands and you ask Almighty Allah to give you an understanding why this is happening, you will get that too. You will be able to put it in context as to why that is happening. And it has happened before. It has happened in the glorious days of the Islamic Empire. What is happening in Iraq and what happened in Baghdad when the hordes from Mongolia raided it. Nothing like that has happened yet. In the present tragedies, that extent of killing of Muslims hasn't even taken place yet. And there's more than one incident. The Rohingyas, have we ever tried to find out who they are and why they got banished in Burma? This is the final chapter of what the British started when they banned the last Mughal king to Burma. He was taken away in such a agonizing manner. 4 of his sons were slaughtered, their heads were cut off and were brought in the presence of that Mughal king on platters. These are your 4 sons. Imagine the agony of a father. And soon after that, they made up a fictitious case and banned him to Burma. Those Rohingyas have a link with the end of the Mughal Empire. And that cycle of revenge from the British is now coming to fruition almost 200 years, 150 years afterwards. That hatred of the Mughal Empire is linked historically to what is happening with the Rohingyas. These things don't happen in a vacuum. What is happening even in the Middle East, if you know your colonial history, you'll start seeing the links. The revenge has never stopped. The crusade mentality has never gone away. Which nation was a nation that was never ever defeated by the colonial powers? We need to know that. Then you'll understand what's happening in Afghanistan. The British never conquered the Afghans. When they were ruling India, they were not able to conquer the Afghans. So they put up plans. You know, we don't have patience. These people plan for 100 years ahead. And the revenge eventually comes through. That's their mentality. They work like that. And it comes through eventually. So when we talk of Hijrah and martyrdom of the martyrdom is very difficult to talk about. I mean, who was martyred? The grandson of Rasulullah, the favorite grandson, the beloved. And being beloved of Rasulullah, surely with Almighty Allah, there must have been a great spiritual situation with the grandchildren of Rasulullah. But in Almighty's plan, a lot of things like that happened. So we had the brotherhood. We learned from this that faith will always triumph. The liberation of humanity comes from the Hijrah, is linked to it. We also learn that when these extreme things happen, we must try to understand that a transition is underway. A transition of humanity, not just of Muslims, is taking place nowadays. We also can remind ourselves by the fact that the first thing Rasulullah did when he arrived in Medina was the establishment of the Masjid. So that gives us an idea of how critical a component of Muslim society is their masjids. It goes beyond the 5 salahs and Eid salah and occasional big nights and other. It goes beyond. The masjid is the center of our civilization, is the center of every Muslim community, and it needs to be used for that. And it's so difficult sometimes in the early days when Islamia was a very small institution. We had to go and find funds to build these classrooms. And when you tell them, you know, education is an extension of what happens in the masjid. Because the first school of the Muslim world, when you go to Medina, don't we like to go and make 2 rak'ah where Ashab al-Sufa used to sit? That platform across the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the first classroom of the Ummah. So education is an integral part of the activities of the masjid. But to have, we've got 1,700 children here, we can't teach them all in the masjid. So you have classrooms. So if you make a niyyah to build a classroom, you're actually going to get similar, and I'm saying it very emphatically, don't ever doubt the fact that your reward is equal, if not more, than building a masjid. It's a bit difficult statement to swallow, but the activity of the masjid, prime activity, which is education, is taking place there. It's not a place of entertainment, a classroom in a Muslim school. It's an extension of what we are not able to do in the masjid. So we need to understand that. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also established good relations with whoever was living in Medina, and particularly the Jews that were there and the Christians that were there. Of course, things went sour because the Jews in particular, not so much the Christians, were wheeling and dealing and planning. So eventually they had to be banished from Medina because of their doings, not because Islam says so, or because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted. They had reached a level of mischief that they had to be removed because of their own doing. So that also happened. And while all the spiritual development and liberation of mankind and all was taking place, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam now, which was not the case in Mecca, has come there as a ruler. And he saw to, I'll just mention 3 or 4 things that Rasulullah, he encouraged a water system to be created. Rasulullah did that. So he was encouraging what we see in our cities. There was a program for poverty alleviation. So when you feed the needy and the poor and you organize yourself, you're doing the work of Rasulullah. That's what he established in Medina. He also made rules for safety and security and law and order. So what we learn in terms of governments and how to rule in a city and in a municipality, Rasulullah did that immediately. Because you have to run a city. And that was also not ignored by the Prophet ﷺ. So quite a few aspects of what the Hijrah and Muharram is all about, but there's a lot more. Time does not allow. So we must look at when Muharram comes, not just as a new year or not just as a very, very sad reminder of the martyrdom and very other things. The 10 days of Muharram and the month of Muharram has a lot of details around it. And then there are also some details that are not relevant or come from non-hadith or weak hadith. But Muharram is special. It's special as a new year, more special because of the martyrdom, and we need to understand this month. It's just not a new year, there's a message in it. Jazakumullah.
Jazakumullah khairan to Maulana for the beautiful words of wisdom, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase Maulana, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant Maulana his health and strength, inshallah, to be inspiration, inshallah, and to see his wisdom with us for many more years to come. Amen ya Rabbil Alameen. Just an announcement, inshallah, we'll make dua for